I am, page 236 of the 1917 edition of J. Hewat McKenzie's Spirit Intercourse. He says, "Man at death rises by a law of attraction to his appropriate plane, usually that of the second or third sphere. If the reader will refer to the diagram of the spheres, he will be able to follow with understanding the size and position of these with their varying degrees. Between each sphere there exists a distinct division. The first and second spheres the author has divided into 3 degrees, but these degrees are purely artificial and are simply used for convenience in describing the different forms of life found upon the lower, middle, and upper degrees of the first and second spheres. Regarding the inhabitants of these 7 spheres, it should be remembered that all have once been human beings, have lived upon earth, and have passed through the change called death. Within these 7 atmospheres around the earth, no angel, god, or devil is to be found such as are pictured in scriptures. Something much more natural and infinitely more interesting exists, and that is the spirits of men and women on their way to perfection. Nor are there to be found in these realms strange and wonderful beasts with 7 eyes, 6 wings, 3 heads, or 9 tails, such have been described by many who have professed to reveal the denizens of heaven and hell. The nearest approach to a devil anywhere to be seen is the degraded man or woman on the lowest plane, and the nearest approach to an angel is seen in the highly developed human being on the 7th sphere. There is no man-made God sitting on a white throne judging the people, but a, capital letters, unseen power which directs with certainty the most rebellious sinner into the path of perfection and holiness, and which affords the good a continuous and unfolding happiness." The astral world. A man at death who has lived a worthy life should rise by a law of his being into the 3rd sphere, which is what I said earlier, but only a limited number arrive there. The majority, with less perfection, remain upon the 1st and 2nd spheres. The worst humans at death gravitate to the lowest astral plane, where conditions are most disagreeable. There the atmosphere is dark and fetid, and the inhabitants dwell in rocky gorges made intensely unpleasant by the emanations from their bodies and by their degraded practices. These gorges vary in width and depth, but they usually measure a few miles in width and many hundreds of feet in depth. They are natural formations in the rocky strata, the cliffs rising almost perpendicularly around them, thus acting as a kind of prison from which they cannot escape but by self-purification. Moisture drops continuously down the sides of these cliffs and lies in large pools and lakes, but others again are quite dry. There's a whole bunch of different types of situations. No vegetation is to be found beyond clumps of fungus and a quantity of dark mold which grows at the base of some of these rocky gorges. With the object of describing the varying amount of light upon the spiritual realms, it will be necessary to make earth sunlight a standard of 100 degrees. Here, upon the cliff heights of what we may call the lowest astral plane, there would be about 10 degrees of light, and on the floor of the pits, probably about 5 degrees, decreasing to total darkness in the crevices and tunnels which run within some of these gorges, to which some of the most degraded beings resort. The light gradually improves as one rises from the lowest regions to the upper astral regions, where it reaches 30 degrees. These astral gulfs Dante called hell and described in exaggerated language. He undoubtedly saw these by means of soul projection while traveling in the spiritual spheres, but they might more fitly be named nature's reformatories. Nowhere are fiery furnaces to be found, but magnetic fires which burn within the souls of every living beings were doubtless seen by Dante clairvoyantly, who imagined them to be torturing fires of God. There are also certain electrical disturbances in the atmosphere, which may have led him to imagine fiery darts sent from heaven to plague the wicked inhabitants. Since Dante's day, man has learned that such infliction of suffering is purely artificial and valueless as a remedy for sin, and that the descriptions of the Inferno were but vivid imaginations, partly due to Dante's religious training, which colored all he saw. These natural pits have steps cut in certain places upon their rocky sides to enable the inhabitants to rise and escape when thoroughly sick and tired of their environment and the practices which have kept them there. The manner of entrance into the lower spheres immediately after death is partly natural and partly artificial, for by a law of attraction and gravitation, souls of a degraded order naturally enter these realms, guided by spiritual beings unseen by them, yet nonetheless capable of controlling their movements, who guide them to that particular reformatory most suited to their needs. These poor souls are not all herded together, but are placed with those of like tastes and failings, for like attracts like, and they exercise upon each other a highly profitable influence, which, though painful, is corrective. Within their limited space, they are allowed considerable freedom to live their lives of debauchery and vice, until they become thoroughly sickened of such vices, and learn by bitter experience that sin or wrong action brings its own punishment. Once they begin to realize this fact, remorse seizes them, and they seek a means of escape from their horrible surroundings, which can only be found by personal effort, by climbing the rocky walls that surround the pit in which they dwell. This is no easy task, for the rocks are practically perpendicular, and the body in which they function is so gross that gravitation affects it, holding it down to the base of the pit. By strenuous effort and diligent search, they at last find a particular spot from which it is possible to make the ascent, and after many attempts reach the cliff tops. They are met by capable guides who take them in hand and help them reach happier surroundings, where they are taught the laws of life and how they may bring their actions into conformity with true happiness. Spirits within these spheres of correction are truly a a hell of their own creation, where they must remain until they sincerely desire a different kind of life. In the case of some, long, weary years are required to accomplish this, but in others, the medicine received quickly works a cure. The average length of time spent in nature's dark house of correction varies considerably, but speaking generally, from 1 to 20 years is about the average time necessary to educate the spirits and allow them to pass on to the second and higher spheres. There are some, however, so steeped in ignorance and vice, and so dead to higher human instincts that they lie upon the lowest level for hundreds and even thousands of years. In these worst cases, spirits have sunk so low that consciousness seems for a time being dormant, and when they ultimately reach a higher sphere, they look back as upon a painful sleep on those long years of incarceration in the bowels of the astral plane.